Okay, let's dive into this explainer. Have you ever wondered how a single, stormy night could birth one of the most powerful spiritual hymns in all of history? Well, today we're exploring an absolutely incredible intersection. We're talking history, deep devotion, actual clinical science, and the unsung poetry of a genuinely heartbroken wife.
So, what could possibly turn a desperately attached husband into a legendary saint? We're starting our story right in the middle of a dark, flooded river during the month of Badan. The current is fierce, the night is pitch black, and this young man named Tulsidas is risking his life crossing this incredibly treacherous water for one reason, just to see his wife. He was so totally consumed by his attachment to her that he literally couldn't bear to be apart for even a few days while she was visiting her family.
But here's the kicker. When he finally arrived, completely drenched and desperate, his brilliant wife, Ratnavali, she didn't greet him with romance. No way. Instead, she delivered this absolutely piercing rebuke. Being a true scholar and a woman of deep wisdom, she basically asked if he wasn't ashamed to come running so desperately. She told him that if he directed even a tiny fraction of this obsessive earthly love toward the divine, he could cross the entire ocean of existence, not just some flooded river. Ouch, right? And that midnight river crossing back in 1538, that became his ultimate breaking point. He was born as an orphan boy named Rambola back in 1511, married to Ratnavali by 1523, and they've been together for over a decade. But following that harsh rejection, his life just rapidly shifted. He vanished into the night. And within a single year, by 1539, he completely left his past behind, transforming into a wandering ascetic, totally dedicated to the search for the divine.
Moving right along to Section 1, Tulsidas and the Chalisa.
This dramatic turning point is exactly what led to his most iconic work, the Hanuman chalisa. Now, what's really cool is that it was written in Awadhi, which was a local dialect. That meant it was actually accessible to everyday common people, not just scholars. The hymn itself is composed of 40 verses, which is actually where the name chalisa comes from, and it's framed by 3 couplets. It's this massive celebration of the immense strength, wisdom, and selfless service of Lord Hanuman, really driving home the idea that true power lies in a pure heart.
Now, history gives us 2 very different, but equally mesmerizing legends about how this powerful hymn was actually written. On one hand, some folks believe Tulsidas composed it while in a deep, peaceful state of spiritual trance, or samadhi, during the Kumbh Mela in Haridwar. But on the other hand, the second legend is a whole lot more dramatic.
According to this second account, Tulsidas was actually thrown into a dark prison cell by an infuriated Mughal emperor, Aurangzeb, all because he refused to perform a miracle on demand. And it was right there, in that dark confinement, that he composed the chalisa. Legend has it that the moment he finished reciting it, an actual army of monkeys suddenly descended upon Delhi, literally forcing his release. So, whether it was sparked by a peaceful trance or the very real threat of an emperor, the origin story of this hymn is deeply, deeply rooted in the idea of divine protection.
Which brings us to Section 2, the science of the Maha Mantra. Okay, so you might be wondering, how does a 16th century poem actually affect a 21st century brain? Well, we aren't just talking about spiritual lore anymore. Actual, peer-reviewed clinical research published in the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research is measuring the physiological impact of reciting the Hanuman Chalisa. They're analyzing it as a Maha Mantra, which is basically a super powerful chant delivered through spiritual sound. And the clinical results? They're honestly pretty striking. In a study involving healthy medical students, just 10 minutes of listening to it significantly dropped both blood pressure and heart rate. We're looking at a decrease of over 10 points in systolic blood pressure, almost 4 points in diastolic, and a drop in pulse rate by nearly 6 beats per minute. That is a highly measurable, undeniable calming effect on the entire cardiovascular system.
Now, why does this matter to us today? Because this ancient poem is now being recognized as a totally free, highly effective intervention for mental well-being and cardiovascular health. Plus, research highlights that rhythmic recitation actually enhances brain neuroplasticity and overall brain function. And it doesn't stop there. The virtues embedded in the text, like courage, humility, and selfless service, they are literally being advocated right now as core components for modern leadership training programs. It's a real game changer.
Let's transition to Section 3, Ratnavali, the unsung poet. To fully understand this whole incredible legacy, we really have to return to the woman who started it all in the first place. History has kind of left her in the shadows, but Ratnavali was a highly educated scholar herself, instructed in scriptures and poetry from a very young age.
While her husband found profound divine union and traveled the country becoming this revered saint, she lived a life of painful earthly separation. She stayed at home, practicing strict asceticism and turning her immense heartbreak into hundreds of beautiful poetic couplets. Just listen to this quote from her. As suffering increases, sins fade. Ratnavali becomes pure, like gold tested in fire. Wow. Her words reveal such a stark contrast between his legendary enlightenment and her quiet, solitary endurance. She wrote these deeply moving verses about her isolation, reflecting on how the pain of an abandoned wife basically acted as a crucible. She wasn't writing about some abstract mythology here. She was writing about her raw, lived reality. And she carried this lasting regret over that one single moment of anger, a moment that ultimately changed the spiritual landscape of India forever. She wrote, "I spoke naturally, but my husband took it to heart. I realized his heart was as fragile as glass." She knew she spoke harshly that night. I mean, she was probably just frustrated that he crossed a dangerously flooded river uninvited, but she never ever intended for him to leave her forever. She realized, tragically just a bit too late, how profoundly sensitive he really was. Moving on to our final section, Section 4, the legacy of Tulsidas. So, the physical legacy of these intertwined lives is permanently anchored in the holy city of Varanasi. Originally, it was known as Lolark Ghat, but this iconic location right on the banks of the Ganges was eventually renamed Tulsi Ghat in his honor. It was right here that Tulsidas composed parts of his massive epic, the Ramcharitmanas, and it's also where he established the famous Sankat Mochan Hanuman idol after receiving a divine vision. And over the centuries, this once humble 16th century residence evolved into a permanent stone monument honoring his massive impact. In the 18th century, the Maratha ruler Balaji Peshwa actually built out the paved stone steps, turning it into a prominent feature of the Varanasi riverfront. Then later, jump to the 20th century, specifically 1941, and the famous industrialist Baldev Das Birla funded a major restoration project to save the aging structure. Today, the Ghat isn't just some dusty monument. It is a bustling hub of living, breathing history. It is alive, with daily Ganga Aarti ceremonies and Ram Charitmanas recitals. Right next to it is the ancient Lolark Kund, where couples still bathe today seeking fertility blessings. And every single year, massive theatrical plays like the Nagnathaya Leela and Ram Leela are performed right there, drawing literally millions of spectators. It keeps the very stories Tulsidas wrote totally vibrant and accessible for new generations. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about how a single, difficult conversation birthed an absolute empire of devotion and health. A wife's frustrated words to her drenched husband led to a poem that centuries later is quite literally lowering blood pressure in clinical trials today. It's kind of wild to think about, right? It really makes you wonder what small, seemingly insignificant moments in your own life might be starting a ripple through history. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today, and keep seeking those moments of clarity.